All right, kids. So I have been awful these past couple weeks about getting content out. Things have been absolutely nuts. We're running around like crazy with the shop, the farm, and the kids. There is no excuse. We're gonna get back on track to doing at least one video a week, hopefully two. I just got to get it out. I've been spreading myself across a bunch of different platforms trying to grow them, and I forgot where I started. So, like I said, we are going to be doing at least 1 to 2 videos a week. And right now, we are in deer season. It is rifle season for deer. So we're going to be doing a bunch of venison content. I've got a hindquarter right here. In a second, I'm going to go ahead, bring you guys in, and I'm going to show you how I break these down. I did post a video on TikTok earlier today, but we're going to do a full in-depth breakdown and talk about it, including steaks. And the reason I'm going to do this one is because it is all grinded stew. They don't want any steaks. So, seems like the perfect one to do it on. So, yeah, we're going to get into that. Later on, probably this week, I got my first deer. So, I'm going to do a video on how I'm breaking down my deer personally. More than likely, you'll get the story of how that happened, because as most things are in my life, it's not very normal. So look forward to that. We're going to get into it. So I'm going to go ahead, just change some camera angles, and we'll see you in a second. All right. So I always take this down connected. Before I turn the camera on, I did clean this up a little bit. Whoever gutted this had a couple issues, and there was a bit of hair and some darkening everywhere, so I cleaned it up for camera. I did not take any fat off. I'm going to go ahead and do a full fat trim on this. So as you can see, here's your pelvis. First thing you're going to do is you're going to make a cut right here down the center of the pelvis. You're going to come up here. You're going to feel your hip bones, and you're going to start your incision until you get to your ball joints. As you can't see, right there is your ball joint. And as you can see, there's a tiny little tendon that attaches that ball joint there. So what you do, and you can see, even though I've loosened up quite a bit of the actual pelvis, it's still pretty attached there. As soon as you do that, everything loosens right up and separates very easy. So what I like to do is block the camera with my big old head, is get about 3/4 of this off and swap over to this side. The reason I do this is because this kind of works as a counterweight. Now your pelvis is still straight up, because what would happen if you took this all the way off? Now you're holding the pelvis like this while working with a knife, trying to make sure that this stays up so you're making the right cuts. So get a little grip on that, and we'll just do it all over again. All right, so now we've got this cleaned up, and what we have is a full hindquarter with the shank attached. So my first step always with this is I will go through and pre-trim before I take anything off of this. The reason I do this is the same reason I do all of my trimming before I do my regular cuts on livestock. If you're going to be trimming steaks and you obviously have access to the whole primal before you cut those steaks, it's going to take way less time to cut those, trim off all that fat when it's one piece. It's less knife strokes. You're working less than you would be having to go through and trim every individual steak. The reason you trim venison fat is because it is very, very, very waxy. It's edible, for sure, but it's one of those situations where if you take a bite out of it when it's super hot, it's palatable. But as soon as that fat cools down, it just coats your mouth like you took a bite out of a candle. So we are taking all of the fat off of this animal. All right, so we got most of it off. Everything else we can take off fairly easily as we're going with it. So my first step, always take this shank off. I like to put it up like this. You're going to find where the joint is, and there we go. So now you can just work your knife around this. Perfect. Now you got your shank. So because we have the shank, we'll just go ahead and start with this for a moment. This is a venison shank. If I can impart any wisdom upon any of you, save your venison shanks. They're absolutely delicious. Obviously, this is not something that's going to go into the crock pot or going to go on the grill, but technically it could with enough prep. This is something that's going to go in the crock pot. It's going to go in the Dutch oven. One of my favorite meals of all time, especially going into winter, is French onion soup on the wood stove. You can take, we have a nice enamel-covered cast iron Dutch oven. We'll pop it right on the wood stove, toss 2 of these in with 5 different types of onions and shallots, and it is incredible. 90% of people still grind them. So the way to do that, you're going to come right up here and just follow the bone down. Then just work your way all the way around. You don't need to be taking massive strokes all the way down. That one sounded bad. All right. And then you can just pull the rest off clean. Toss that. If you're making stock, save your bones. They are delicious. And they make a fantastic game stock. Again, I'm going to be going over what I'm going to be doing for my deer. And again, if you've watched my video on how I put my beef in the freezer, it's slightly different from how most people do it. So, get a good sharp knife. So, we'll get this back into frame. So, the way I attack the hindquarter, I have the bottom of the femur bone facing away from me at a slight angle, and I'll start my cut there. As you can see right here, I'll mark it a little more so you can see it. There is this muscle group right here. This, if you watched any of my other stuff, this is the round tip. So we are going to follow that membrane, open that up, spin it around, and continue to make our cuts. Separate it like that, and just work the rest of this bone around. I like doing it that way because you don't have to cut up as far. Again, if you can separate this bone to about here and make your 2 incision cuts, you can pull this up with less trimming. So we'll go ahead and toss that. Pop this kneecap out. So the first section we are going to pop off is the top round. I have already taken the cap off the top round. This wasn't a huge deer, so it was fairly easy to come off. This is just a extra piece of the tip that gets trimmed off anyway, so we're going to get rid of that. All right, so here is your top round. So far this year, I've turned this into roasts, cutlets, stew, steaks. You can do quite a bit. Basically anything you can do with a beef top round, you can also do with a venison top round. So then we're going to pop this heel meat out. This is going to go straight to the grind pile. Technically this whole hindquarter is, but we're going to do that. So then you're going to pop that little chunk of fat out because there's that nice fun little gland in there. And pop your eye round out. There's your eye round. So when I package these, I don't cut these into steaks or medallions or anything. I get them all trimmed up. This will all get taken off. And these go in, depending on the size, like I would probably package this one solo, but the majority of the time I'll package both eye rounds from each side in the same package. This is where it starts to get a little funky. So what we have left, we have our tri-tip, our top round tip, our sirloin, and our bottom. Once again, they're not tricky in the matter of like, oh, they're crazy different compared to other cuts. Let's check something. Good, we're still live on that. They're different sizes. And they're different sizes because obviously a deer is a lot more mobile and a lot more agile than, say, something like a beef. So there are cuts that are bigger to correspond with the muscle groupings that the animal needs to use. Like the sirloin is much smaller on a deer, and the eye round is double the size. Again, round tip, comparatively, definitely bigger along with the bottom. So again, it's fairly interesting. We're going to go ahead and take this sirloin off, but unlike doing a beef or something like that, we are going to leave the cap attached to the bottom round. So there's your sirloin. These are absolutely delicious. I keep these whole, packaged one per package. And again, just toss out in the grill, a little bit of seasoning, a little bit more trimmed up, and you are good to go. I am going to go through, trim all these up and everything, but I'm just trying to give you guys a quick what's going on with them. All right, so we pop that round tip off, and we'll take this tri-tip off as well. All right, so this we're just going to toss in the grind right away so it's out of the way. Again, even though we're grinding all this, try and take as much fat off as possible. I add pork fat to all of my grinds. It adds better flavor and definitely makes it a better quality. So now that we got everything torn apart, we're going to go ahead and trim this up. I'm going to be taking the bottom and the top round, turning it into stew. So I'm going to show you how to make steaks out of the rest. I'm a pretty heavy trimmer when it comes to venison. I'll pull this whole bottom section of the round tip off. Again, where I would leave it on a beef, it's just not, it makes for a better eating steak to take that off. So there's that. And we're just going to make it nice and pretty. All right. I only usually make my steaks For venison, about an inch and a quarter. So that's what you're looking at for tip steaks. Again, they're fairly tender, really nice eating steaks. And no one's going to complain about them, that's for sure. And if they do, don't invite them over to your house anymore, because if they're going to complain about free deer meat, they don't need to be your friends. So those are your tip steaks. And what we're going to do with those is that, because they're going in the grind. Again, your sirloin, we're going to go ahead and clean this up. Make it nice and pretty, because that's what matters. Presentation. You can take the cutter out of retail. You can't take the retail out of the cutter, unfortunately. Biggest thing also is to pay attention to deer hair. Deer hair gets absolutely everywhere. If you have the ability to spray your deer down before it goes in the cooler, absolutely do it. It'll save you a whole bunch of time. So this is venison sirloin all trimmed up. Again, it's not a huge steak. This wasn't a huge deer, but this is a nice chunk of meat you can toss on the grill. We're going to go ahead, just toss that aside. So clean up this eye round to make it pretty. All right. So like I said, I'll usually package these one per package. They are far more tender than, say, a beef eye round. But again, they're nothing to write home to mom about. So we're going to pop this membrane that should look familiar off of the bottom round. We can just take that, get all that good trim off, and leave all that nasty sinew. All right. I will take this side of the muscle group off and toss that in the grind. So the steaks, again, they're not huge, but they're nice, quick, and easy to toss in the fry pan or on the grill. It's a little dark on the back, so we're going to go ahead and clean that off real quick. And again, when I'm doing this, I'm making my incision cut here, and then as I'm cutting, I'm pushing down, but at the same time, angling my knife in the front up a little bit. If I push down like this, I'm just going to cut right through. But when you're pushing down in the back of the blade and have the front of the blade up, you just slide right across. So now that's all cleaned up. Once again, this is going to be stew, but I wanted to make sure I showed you guys how I do these. Once again, I do these about an inch and a quarter. Something like that. And that is some nice looking bottom round steaks. So we'll go ahead and toss those aside. Now we're on our top round. Once again, it has the same artery that any beef or pig or anything you're cutting up is going to have in it. Just want to make sure you get that out. We'll get all the silver skin. I already took the cap off. So we're just going to go ahead and clean up some of these dark parts. And I also pull that second muscle group out that we would usually keep on, say, a beef, just because it's bigger. So, clean up that dark stuff. All right, so then we'll face that off. And there are some gorgeous top rounds. So that is how I personally break down a top round, or break down a venison hindquarter. I hope that was helpful to you guys. I'm going to be pumping out a bunch more venison content this week and next week. I only do venison for about 2 weeks, so I'm going to try and get as much banked as I can. So I hope this was helpful, and keep paying attention, keep following along, because we're going to be throwing a bunch of this stuff out.